All set. Good evening and welcome to the March 22nd, 2023 Northborough Appropriations Committee meeting. First on our agenda tonight is the approval of minutes from March 1st, 2023 and March 8th, 2023.
Make a motion to approve both sets of minutes as written.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Minutes are approved. Next on our agenda is the Fire Department Fiscal Year 2024 Budget Presentation. Chief Parenti?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Finally, I was like scheduled and it wasn't that I was scheduled.
I know.
It's crazy. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me here. Normally what I like to do is give you guys a little background of the kind of year we just had. So I'm going to give you a little highlights of the year we had. I'll touch real quickly on our current capital, what's going on with that, and then I'll get into the budget. That's okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. So we had, since I got hired in January of 2016, in this past year, we've had the busiest year since I've been here. We did over 2,500 calls. Really hopping, doing a lot of, we dropped down a little bit during COVID, and then we have just spiked right back up, and it's just crazy. It's not unusual for us to have 2 ambulances out and a mutual aid ambulance coming in. We're that busy.
Yep.
And the guys are doing an amazing job. So all the glories to them. They've done an incredible job. Some of the initiatives and accomplishments we did this year, we accomplished this year. One of the big things I was doing was trying to attain a response time, an EMS response time of under 8 minutes. The national standard is 8 minutes. We were actually able to get it at 7 minutes and 46 seconds, which is terrific. So that means we have an ALS unit on scene 90% of the time in 7 minutes and 46 seconds, which is terrific because with advanced life support, the sooner we can start that, the better it is for the survivability of the patient. So that was a really big one for us. We were very excited for that. We completed the purchase and the setup of a new vehicle for mine. Richard was asking me about the new little Ford out there. We did downsize quite a bit. We went from the Tahoe to the Ford Interceptor because my logic was, I don't need something quite that fancy. I just need to get to the scene and have radios in it to run command. So it's a much smaller vehicle, more fuel efficient, and it's working out really well for us so far. We also were able to get our new pickup truck because our other one was all rusting out. So we were able to get that all up and fitted up. It's amazing how expensive it is to fit up and buy radios for those things and to stripe them, but that one's up in service now, so we're really excited. Another big accomplishment we had, and that was in conjunction with all the departments in town, was we completed our analysis and we completed the conversion from copper lines to the new digital communication system for our radio communications. Verizon was getting rid of all their copper lines, and they sent us something that said, hey, we're getting rid of the copper lines, figure it out. So we actually brought them in. Becca headed up the committee, and we did an incredible job. We got it done, and Chris Carlton from the supervisor at the communications, but they've all been converted over now. So if they get rid of the copper lines, it doesn't matter to us. We're running digital to all of them, so that's a really good thing. We did get a grant to put in a Plimo vent system in our current fire station. And people were asking me, well, why are you putting something in a new station when we're hoping to build a new station? And that's a real simple answer. Number one cause of death in firefighters right now is cancer. And it's been determined, it's from the turnout gear we wear, which actually has PFAS in it, we found out. It's from fighting fires, obviously, and it's from living above a garage. So we live above a garage. The exhaust system we have in there isn't very efficient. This new system, which was almost 100% funded by a federal grant, actually hooks onto the exhaust system. So when the truck starts up, the fan starts up, takes the exhaust right out. So it's so much safer. Some of you may know we've had several people in the department who have come down with cancer. Mm-hmm. And whether it's related to that or other things, we don't know. Even better about this system, and the reason I picked this system, is it's movable. So all the money we invested, all the grant, as soon as we build a new station, you unbolt it, you put it in the new station, and you bolt it back up. So we didn't waste anything. We can actually move it to the new station. So we're very excited about that. And the final thing we did is we finally, a goal of mine was to expand our SAFE education program. So some of you may be familiar, we do the SAFE program for the seniors, where we go out and we do home inspections for them. We replace smoke detectors. If they don't have one, we give them one. that we can install a battery-powered one, and we do like fall prevention and all that. That's all funded through a state grant. We've now applied for and we're awarded one for the schools. So we're going to be getting back into the schools. I've assigned one firefighter to be responsible for that. He's really excited about it. And we actually got into several of the schools this year because when we got the grant, the timing was such that it was, can we get into the schools before school's out? So we're actually getting into the schools. So we're really excited about that. So those were some of our big accomplishments this year. As far as our CIP program for our ongoing capital program, the big thing this upcoming year is our fire engine one. So engine one is it's an older truck. It's done its 20-year stint as a first and second due. Insurance Service Organization, which is a company that comes in and rates our insurance and says, hey, this is what people in Northborough are going to pay, says after 20 years the trucks need to be replaced. So it's due. It was due to be replaced this year, or it's due to be replaced next year, and it's a 2 to 3 year wait for new fire trucks now. It is insane. It used to be a year, maybe 18 months in a bad year. Now it's 2 years to 3 years. They'll quote you 2 years and you'll see it in 3.
Yeah.
It's really bad, and it's all the manufacturers. The one thing the manufacturers are offering, though, is discounts if you pay them in cash, or if you pay 50% in cash. So that's a nice thing if we can get it, but that's a big thing they're pushing right now. That is the only thing on our 2024 capital program. I think you guys probably have a copy of our capital program. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out, ask me questions. I'd be happy to straighten them out, anything for you.
Yeah, I have one.
Sure.
Is there such thing as trade-ins on like an old
We
fire
do.
truck?
We
Yeah,
do.
Okay.
So what happens is, you know where they normally end up overseas,
Okay.
or in a small volunteer department. So there's these companies like Brindley Mountain. There's all these. Is this one, for example? They buy used fire trucks from the dealer. So say if we did an emergency one,
Right.
E1 will give us $10,000 for our truck.
Okay.
They'll sell that truck to Brindley Mountain for 15, and Brindley Mountain will market it and sell it for 30 or whatever. Which is good, except when you know the truck has. You really have to be careful buying used trucks.
Well, it's 20 years. Right?
It's got 20 years. There's the pump right now is in very bad shape. It's still pumping. It's still passing its test. But my pump mechanic, who just happened to be a guy I worked with for 20 years up in New Hampshire, he's my pump mechanic. He said we can't adjust it anymore. All the adjustings are done. All the packings are tight. We're at the point where if it fails, we tear it down, we rebuild it.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons we're really, and then we're having some battery issue. It's an old truck. It's a 20-year-old truck.
I'm glad there's still some value in it. So.
Yeah, we trade anything we can trade in. We trade in. We traded in our pickup truck. So we would do one of two things. We either trade it in or we downgrade it. So my car, which still had plenty of good miles left, went down to the captains for fire prevention, inspections, and all that. The car they were using got traded in. So, we do whatever we can to help offset the cost of the vehicles.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
On the capital plan here, you list the engine replacement.
Mm-hmm.
And it says the source of funds is 6, which says free cash other. What is the source?
So what happens is when I have to do when I do the spreadsheet, I have to pick something. So I in the past, when we have the money in the free cash account, we normally purchase large capital items, which is a town policy, through free cash. Once I get it, it goes up to town hall. They have to determine whether or not they have the free cash for that. The other would be through taxation or through a bond. Correct, John?
Yes. So this item was proposed to be funded using ARPA funds, but as you know, the Board of Selectmen chose not to fund that, which means the only other funding source, given the size and the limited amount of free cash that we have this year, is to fund the project through debt. So it's on the warrant to be funded through through debt issuance.
I just wanted to check because
Yep. This was as submitted.
there's a 2.
Yes. This was as originally submitted, which you have here.
And again, I don't know where we're going to have the money, so I have to pick an item. So like if it was our ambulances, it would be through our revolving account, because that's how we do it. So that's how we pick it. Any other questions on the capital? projects.
No.
So,
If
John,
if I may, it might be helpful just to update the board. So the Fire Station Building Committee, not the Feasibility Study Committee, which concluded its work, but the Fire Station Building Committee, the next phase, had its first meeting last week. And so I know I've updated you on this, but just for somebody who may be watching, we're at the next phase. So the feasibility study was completed, and we had funding, $3.5 million that was authorized at town meeting to purchase the land and to fund the project manager and the architectural design services. So you know the saga over the land. Again, the town did quite well out of that deal because we now have acquired both parcels. They're fully remediated and all structures have been removed. So the site, we have a clean site. And as I said to the building committee last week, the hardest thing about that project is behind us. You have a site in the downtown that we were able to acquire for reasonable costs that can house one central station with appropriate circulation, and now with the acquisition of that 10 Monroe parcel behind it, there's no conflict with any of the neighbors. So we have the site, everything is ready to go. So I appointed and the Board of Selectmen approved the building committee. So that group is now starting to meet. Their next meeting is in the second, I believe the second week of, or the last week of, last week of March, actually. They'll be meeting to interview. We already issued the RFP for the owner's project manager. So they'll be conducting those interviews and selecting an owner's project manager. As of today, the RFQ, the request for qualifications for the architect, hit the street as well. So we're kind of doing those concurrent. So we'll get the owner's project manager on the team, and then immediately shift gears, interview the architects, and get going. So this next phase is the design development of the station that we're going to be building. So it'll be a relook at the conceptual design. Now we know we have both parcels to work with, so there are a couple of circulation options that are now on the table that might not have been had we not acquired that second parcel on 10 Monroe. So that committee, this is really a distinct next phase, and that committee is off and running. So that process will take the balance of the year, moving into the start of next year. So if you'll start seeing the agendas and the meetings being posted, and they'll get moving. They're moving now quite quickly. So that's the update on the building. This is the Fire Station Building Committee. So they're up and running.
thank you, John.
John, if we get a representative on that committee, is Jim on it, for example, on the fire station building committee?
No, actually by charter, anybody serving on the Appropriations Committee is not supposed to serve on any other
I thought,
committees.
I knew that, but I thought that Elaine had served on the,
Yeah, we've had a few things that have occurred, but technically they're not supposed to. So we do have a member on there from Financial Planning Committee, which is really the focus of the capital budget. That's kind of their primary. And so we have a representative from Financial Planning on the committee. The chief serves on the committee as well. There's
I hope so.
Dawn Rand. Well, it's a bit of a debate lately as to whether or not staff should be serving as voting members on some of these committees. But in particular, I drew a significant distinction between a fire station and like a library or a senior center. The end user is the staff. And so it's important that they have a seat at the table because they are going to be the ones that are using the building. It's not really a building that's open for public use. There'll be a ready room, a training room that could be used for some public meeting space, but it's really the firefighters that are the ones that they're the ones that we're designing the building for. So, but anyway, keep your eye out. If you're interested, you can tune in and watch those meetings. They'll be taking place on a regular basis now.
I would think you'd want the chief on too, since it's such a specific use for the building, you'd want somebody with the expertise to know exactly what's needed, and especially with the rise in cancer rates, what's standard in the industry, what technologies can be incorporated, and so forth.
So that committee has been appointed and approved, and they're up and running.
John, I have another
Yeah.
question.
Oh, yeah, I'm just want to fall back a little bit, because I don't watch the selectmen meetings, so I apologize. What was the rationale why the selectmen rejected the ARPA fund? Do we have an answer to that? What, and why would we want to go into debt, into a debt service thing, as opposed to using ARPA funds?
The discussion that took place was, I believe that they were looking at potentially other projects that they might want to fund.
Okay. They didn't mention what other, but they just said this one wasn't one of them, I guess.
Yeah, there's the downtown revitalization project, which is still being defined. It's not an actual project yet, but it's getting closer as that committee wraps up. And there's been talk of, White Cliffs as a potential, but they have not gone through. We've had many discussions about starting, but we have not had a full discussion on the board regarding the use of the ARPA funds.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep.
And I'd just like to add, just for the record, that this committee supported using the ARPA funds for the fire truck, just so that's part of public record.
As far as our budget goes, our budget's made up of two parts. We have the general budget, and I have the revolving account. The revolving account is funds that are, that we get from billing for ambulance services, okay? So the first thing I want to talk about is the general budget. In the general budget, the budget reflects a $217,931 increase. There's several reasons for the increase. Obviously, we just came to agreement, or not obviously, I apologize. We just came to an agreement with the firefighters union on a new contract. So those raises and increases for different things are reflected in there. Utilities have gone through the roof. It's incredible. First time I got a bill this year that was double the previous month, I went, oh my goodness, where am I going to find this money?
We've seen that in every department that's come before us. It's unbelievable. Electricity cost.
And the fire station uses a lot of electricity, a lot of heat, because it's a big open garage and then the ups and right. So
But all the buildings and all the departments have seen a substantial increase, and it's completely out of department heads' control. It's
some minor increases in vehicle and equipment maintenance, simply because costs are going up. This supply chain is becoming more and more difficult to get parts to repair things. I've had an ambulance that's been out for a month now waiting for a simple repair. And it's finally down at the shop, but now we're waiting for the shop to finish to fix it and get it back. So those were some other increases. And there's some other things went down, such as our longevity went down a little bit because we had a change in, we have some people retiring. I have a longtime captain, 40-some-year captain that's retiring on May 1st. I've had, and we're hiring, and I had another guy that had been here for 15 years retired because he's in nursing school and wants to do that. So those bring down some of our payments, but then other things bring it back up. The biggest thing you're going to see that is affecting the budget is the addition of a deputy chief. Now, when I first came here in 2016, it was shortly after, and I don't know if you've all seen it, but there was a study for the Center for Public Safety Management did a staffing study on the fire department and the police department. One of the things they recommended at that time, they recommended several things, including the fire station and everything. But one of the things they had recommended, two of the big things they recommended, was increasing from 4 people to 5 people per shift and adding the deputy chief. At that time, when they asked me what I thought, when the board at that time asked me what I thought, I said, without question, we need to support the firefighters. We need to get more people in there. I can do some more work. We can get by. I still have Captain Hurst here. He does all the plans reviews. We're okay for a little bit. In 2017, I sat down with then Assistant Town Administrator Kim Foster, and we drafted up the job summary, and we put it through the Personnel Board, and we had it approved at that year's town meeting. Since then, I've been bugging the guy over here with supplemental requests every year saying, can I have my deputy? Can I have my deputy? Can I have my deputy? This year it came to a crucial point. So what happened this year is, as I mentioned, Captain Fred Hurst, who is my fire prevention officer. He reviews all of our plans. all of our commercial plans for sprinklers, for fire alarms, for egress, for all of that stuff. He does all those major inspections, and he has the knowledge and the familiarity with the codes that he can do that. He announced his retirement. So he's going to be leaving. His last day is May 1st. He's working until 6, and he's taking vacation from 6 o'clock on, because he doesn't want to work another night shift. I said, Cap, I understand you. You definitely put your time in. He was a call firefighter at 16. He's now 64, and he's retired. So yeah, he put his time in, that's no question. But when he came to me, I was shortly before we had to start submitting things, so I did submit to John a supplemental request at this time, stressing the importance of this position, and this is why. I can do house plan reviews, and I can do site plan reviews, but to do a building plan review requires intimate knowledge of the code. Unless you've been doing it for a long time, or that's your specialty, you don't have that intimate knowledge. I have no one that has that intimate knowledge except for Captain Hurst. So with him leaving, it's really critical. We get a new warehouse in town. I need someone who can review those plans. I get all the work that's going on up at Chops Way right now with the Marshalls and that whole addition over there, and then where the Sierra's going in. I need someone who can review those plans and respond intelligently and say, okay, you need to mark it this way, you need to do this, you need to move the sprinklers around here, you can't put this demising wall up, all these different things. So I explained to John that this is really a critical position that we hired. And John was very understanding of that and said, yes, we've held off since 2015, it's now 2023. I think it's time that we actually put that position in. One of the other big things is this is the first department I've been in where I haven't had a second in command. So I have 4 captains. And the captains are awesome, don't get me wrong. I can trust my captains to run the shift and to do everything perfectly. When I go out for a week or 2 weeks, when I take vacation, I put a captain in charge administratively, and I rotate that so they get experience. And then I have my phone with me, and my wife yells at me when I get phone calls from John or from Winnie, you're on vacation. That's okay, honey, because there's certain things that they may not be able to make a decision on or comfortable because they're not in that position. The other thing is the captains are all in the union. I have no one else within my department other than Lorraine, who's my admin, who's in a different union, who is a non-union person. It is critical when it comes to disciplining, progressive discipline for doing evals, that you have another person that you can go to and say, am I off base with this? What do you think about this discipline? What do you think? And I used to be that when I was a deputy chief in Merrimack, New Hampshire, and when I became a chief, I didn't have that here. And it makes it very difficult. So that was one of the other reasons that I requested it. I really think it's a critical position. I was thrilled that John was open to it. Again, it's not new. I've been asking for it and John, I can think back every time at this meeting for the last 4 years, John said, the chief keeps asking, and so I'm asking again. That is really it for big changes in the budget. We try to, and I've always said this, and I'll say it again here today, that I believe my job is to be I'm a fiscal agent for the people, not just for the board, but for the people in this town. And my job is to provide the best service possible at the best cost possible. I don't believe in spending money we don't need. I turn back money in all the time when we have capital projects that we're able to underspend. I don't spend the budget when I need it, but when I need something, I'm not afraid to ask for it and justify why we need it. And that's why I'm asking for those changes this year.
So if I may, through the chair, back in December, we sort of set our budget targets. The K-8 schools were made a compelling argument for a 4.9% increase because basically 2.5% of that was special education costs that they have no discretion or control over. So this position, as budgeted, is budgeted at $117,000, which is the midpoint of the range that was approved by the Personnel Board in town meeting. That is not within that 3.5% target figure. I cannot fit that, but Chief made a compelling argument, and that's why we're bringing it forward for consideration. It's been a long time since we've added a full staff person. Frankly, one of my recommendations, probably my most passionate recommendation to the select board, has been to use some ARPA money to do a full staffing study across all departments, because every department has and will request additional staffing. And just like the last time we did the review, the study that the chief made reference to, that was done by a firm out of DC, it was actually through the International City Managers Association, it was part of their consulting arm. We brought them in to get an objective review, and they did a full operational review, not just a staffing study, but a full operational review of both the police department and the fire department. Because in order to understand how staffing fits in, you need to look at the whole service delivery model, not just the one that you have. That may not be the most efficient. But we did internally, we did a staffing review, looked at all the departments, made a couple tweaks here and there. But the public safety, both police and fire, at the time were requesting, and not this chief, but the prior chief was requesting like 10 new positions. And we acknowledge that there's probably a need there, but it's, that's a steep number. And then right after that, not the current police chief, but the prior one, again, wanted 10 more positions as well. So I said, listen, there's a need here. There's a lot of data that needs to be gone through. So we brought in, using mitigation funds from the mall, because that was one of the impetus for why, we needed more staff. And so we used funds from mitigation funds from the mall to do a comprehensive review. And out of that review came the recommendation for, in the police department, it was to add two officers, not 10, but add 2 officers. And not because of workload, but mostly because of officer safety on the midnight to 8 a.m. shift. And then a swing sergeant be promoted. In the fire department, as the chief said, it was to add a position for each shift from 4 to 5, allowed them then to run an ambulance and a piece of apparatus. And it sort of was a sweet spot where we got the most bang for the buck. That was completely 100% supported by this committee at the time. And what we did is we phased the positions in one a year. So over a period of 4 or 5 years, we worked in those 5 positions in total between police and fire. But as the chief said, we did stall on the deputy chief position, which was recommended just as strongly as the other ones that we added. We just couldn't fit it, and it's just been competing needs. But as the chief said, we're getting to the point now where the timing with the changeover in the staff makes it more critical. The other thing that he didn't, I'm not sure if he mentioned when I was whispering on the side, is as much as I'd like to keep this guy until he's in his 70s, he's entering his last few years here.
Lately, yeah.
So he has to. He's talking about Fred Hurst, but he's approaching the mandatory retirement age where he can't continue even if he wants to. So we need to have some succession planning in that department, where we're losing this long-time institutional knowledge with the captain that handles this very specialty area that by the job description would go to a deputy chief, but also in terms of the succession planning and the transition, we need to start giving some serious thought to that for the department as a whole. And that's why this position kind of boiled to the top and is for inclusion in this budget request.
Thank you for mentioning that, John, because that succession is very important. If you bring somebody on at the last second and try and train them, it makes it very difficult.
So I'm not going to say how to run the department, but one of the 4 captains, are any of them qualified to take that position?
None of them are interested.
None of them are interested. Okay, I didn't know that part.
So there's a couple reasons, and I can relate very well, because when I went from captain to assistant chief or to deputy chief, it happened to me, you take a pay cut.
Oh, really?
You take a big pay cut because you lose all of your overtime.
You become a salaried
It's a
employee.
salary position. You're supposed to have nights and weekends off.
But you're still working the hours.
Yeah. How many times have I called you on a night or a weekend?
Yeah. I see
Yeah,
now.
so none of them are, and 2 out of the 3, besides Captain Hurst, 2 out of the 3 are coming up on retirement as well. They're coming up on their final 2 years.
No, okay,
Yeah.
you explain it to me, I understand.
There's a significant amount of institutional memory that is just ready to exit the building. And so getting another key position in, I think, will provide some continuity for that transition that we're going to be facing. The one thing the chief doesn't mention is you do take a pay cut, but On the flip side, your salary is all pensionable,
Yes.
whereas overtime is not. So you see
Very true.
some of the younger staff is more interested earlier on, not so much in the advancement as in working the overtime and making the money. And then as they start to mature and they don't want to work those, those hours and 24-hour shifts and so forth, then they start to migrate over into management. But it is difficult because in that middle position, you are foregoing, access to that overtime, which is why the salary is where it's at. Again, it's at the midpoint, and the salary range was based on a market analysis. So we don't pick these numbers out of the air. So that's a market analysis, and just trying to be realistic. I don't want to put it in the budget at the bottom of the range. If we're really not going to get somebody, you want somebody with a certain amount of experience. So oftentimes we have openings, we'll get the midpoint down for a starting position, but it depends on who comes into the recruitment process.
Right. Before,
Sure.
I know from previous experience that there's a real difficulty in finding firefighters right now.
Firefighter, paramedics are impossible.
So even if, or when we do go out to hire a deputy, what do you think the time frame for bringing that person on would be? Do you have any idea how long it would take to find somebody to fill?
No, and that's a really fair question. My intent would be to post it for 4 weeks. And what you're going to get is a captain who's passionate about code enforcement from another department, who wants to make that step because, and most people that take that step, they're not doing it because of the weekends and nights off. They're not doing it because of the money, because they want to make a difference. And someone who's really passionate about codes, they're really geeky people, but those are the people we need in that position because they understand that code. So I'm assuming a month posting and then the promotional process, as I always do, I want members of the town, the select board to sit in on that process so they, especially as John mentioned, this is going to be for succession planning, right? So when I leave, shouldn't they have a say in who's there? That just kind of makes sense. So I want them to be part of that process. So that would be another couple, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then get them on board. So probably a month or 2 at least. Just to hire a firefighter now takes us about 2 months
Yeah.
when we find one.
But you'll be looking also, in an ideal world, somebody who also is interested in becoming a chief.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because at some point, that's the way in. If somebody's ambitious and wants to be a fire chief, you have to come up through the ranks, and at some point you have to go from being a union employee to management, and the deputy is that turning point.
That in and of itself is quite the transition. Going from being a member of the union to being a member of management is a real shocker. And then eventually you find yourself going, oh, these union guys, what are they asking for? I just don't get it.
Right.
One other thing, yes, please.
Sorry.
No, you please go ahead.
If you were to hire a deputy chief with the idea that they were going to transition into the chief role, how long would it take for that person to be qualified or have the necessary experience and knowledge in order to be chief? Like, to me, like, when you look at around town, how many houses are there in town? How many roads do they have to know? Like, it's just a lot of knowledge that needs to transition from one person to the other.
It's a great question, but that's not what they need to learn. Putting the fires out, putting the wet stuff on the red stuff isn't that hard. I mean, there's techniques, and we've learned it as we're coming up through. When you get into management, it's dealing with labor. It's dealing, with progressive discipline, dealing with the citizens, or going out and telling somebody, I'm sorry, you can't do that. It's against the code, and I'm going to have to shut you down. And that's all the stuff, and that takes a while to learn. I was a deputy chief, so I made deputy chief in 21, or I made assistant deputy chief in 21, and I didn't take the chief's position until 2010, right? Because I needed that 9 years to say, okay, tell me about this job. And learning because learning that interaction, becoming a leader, even if you already have leadership skills, it's really hard. It's hard from the other end, and that's what it takes a while learning. Developing rules, developing policies that everyone can agree to, and learning how to work with some unique people. How's that? With a bunch of different personalities, it's really difficult.
Right.
But
Well, I know from a professional standpoint, working and building companies, how important it is to have that transition.
Yes.
And especially when you're talking, for all intents and purposes, the president and CEO level of the department, You can't bring somebody in and train them for 2 weeks and have them take over. It's-
Without question, 3 years, which is what I'm looking at right now, is about the minimum I would want to go. You can bring someone in with no experience and make him chief, but then he or she is going to stumble and trip and have issues for quite a while, which leads to more problems on the town administrator end and on assistant town end and on HR issues. So you really want someone who.
And they get frustrated, and then they're like, I'm no good at this, and they want to leave.
And they walk
then you're
away.
happy And you're left with nobody.
Right, yeah. And one of the other big things with the deputy chief, and I mentioned at the very beginning how busy we were. So we do what's called 26F, which are resale inspections. Every time you sell your house, we have to come out and inspect it. Okay? Every time you have a LP tank put in, we have to come out and inspect it. Every time you have an oil tank put in or removed, or an oil burner put in or removed, we have to come out and inspect it. We inspect all new houses. That's all being done right now by shift personnel. And what we do is we schedule those inspections in a window from 1 to 4, and people yell at us. Well, why can't you just be here? I said, well, we're like the cable guy, we can't necessarily be there, but here's the problem. If I tell you I'm going to be there at 1 and I get a med call, I think the med call is more important for us to go to than to come do your inspection. It's putting a huge burden on these guys that are already running all these calls, and now their captains are doing inspections 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night because they didn't get to them at the 1, 2, 3, or 4 o'clock one. So that's another area that deputy chief would help relieve that pressure on the on-duty guys and give them a little breathing room to be able to do maybe some additional training, or to not worry about, okay, I got to run back and you take this call and I'm going to go take the car and go do the inspection. Because people, and I understand people getting frustrated, I really do. I mean, haven't we all sat there waiting for the guy to show up? He said he'll be there at noon,
Yeah.
right? So this would
Interrupt
eliminate
for one
some.
sec. I apologize for keeping, but it's the
You
stuff.
interrupt all you want, Tim.
By having the deputy there
Mm-hmm.
to relieve some of these additional stresses, will that in any way reduce overtime?
Probably not.
Okay.
Okay, but probably not, because it'll be a salaried position. We won't use that position to fill any
But
union
just by freeing the
positions.
guys up so they
But
don't have to go to a home
It'll
inspection.
free them out. So what could happen is, we may not have to do a recall. So right now, excuse me, whenever we get past a certain level of alarms, we have to do a recall, and off-duty personnel can come back at time and a half for any hour or portion thereof. If they're there for an hour and a minute, it's 2 hours. If they're there for 2 hours and a minute, it's 3 hours,
Yeah.
right? So with our call volume, we tend to do a lot more recalls now than we ever used to do. So there may be some relief in that, but that would all depend on, we'd have to look at it operationally. But I don't want to see it would be significant enough to make a huge difference in our overtime numbers.
Okay.
But thank you for asking that question. I'd like to be as honest with you guys as
Oh,
possible.
I appreciate that, yeah. But even if it saves,
A couple of recalls, yeah.
a couple hours every week, it adds up over the course of the year, and plus I think of I know the guys like to work and have, or the firefighters like to have the overtime, but reducing the workload's got to be,
Here's where it will save, Tim. Right now, I have somebody who needs an inspection on a Tuesday. Captain Hurst works 1 day on, 2 days off, 1 day on, 4 days off. If he's not working on that day, I have to bring him in at time and a half. And he's been really great with me. Chief, I'll come in, I'll do that inspection for you, but I'm not going to expect him to do it for free. I'm going to pay him for it. So that could be a 2-hour inspection, right? So that is where you would recognize the savings, that he's there Monday through Friday, or if one has to be done on a weekend, which occasionally we do that, or it has to be done in the evening. He or she is a salaried position, and they can fill that. So yeah, there you would recognize the savings.
okay, thank you.
If I can just add, I know the chief touched upon this, but again, usually when we go through the budget reviews, the public safety are probably the first round they come in. We start with the largest departments in terms of the budget impacts, and then fill in the spaces around that. So normally it's public safety that came in. He was scheduled to come in a couple of times, and we bumped him, and I know he mentioned it, but I just want to make sure that people heard this. So we were in a very protracted negotiations with the fire union, and I'm not telling tales outside of school at this point. We've settled the contract. But it was a very long negotiation, and we were actually in mediation. So firefighters, police officers, they cannot strike. They're public safety. So their remedy is to go to the Joint Labor Management Committee. It's a mediation arbitration process. So we were in mediation and heading into arbitration to try to get that contract settled. And I don't know, I think maybe they got nervous that I was leaving, and maybe the devil you know is better than the one you don't. But we were able to settle the contract. And so actually sitting here today, well, we've got one more, which should be wrapped up hopefully on Monday. So we have to go back and, we've been constantly revising budgets as as these contracts settle. And but the fire, that's one of the reasons why he's coming in at this point, is that contract is now settled. It's also why we're trying to figure out what the impact, was going to be in terms of potentially adding in a deputy chief. That's why it's coming. That's why he's at the end of the process, and why, despite the fact that we have spoken about the deputy chief position for years. I know the folks that were on when we went through that, some of you were on the committee when we went through that study, at least the three of you were on, and so those conversations happened, year after year afterwards. And but again, at some point you have to pick a couple of key positions and start to try to work some of this staffing in. I think it's one of the issues, as I said, once I'm gone, the board is really going to need to take up, because we run a pretty lean operation here, a very lean operation. You've mentioned like the town of Westboro right next door. We're 16,000, they're 18, 19,000. They have 38 more people in DPW alone. So we get great value, but one of the things that came through is coming out of the pandemic, we really maxed everybody out, and we didn't have any extra capacity. And when somebody went down, whole departments went down. We don't have a lot of depth to the bench. We have a department head and no assistant. Like in this case, you got a chief and there's no deputy, or you have the finance director who is also the town accountant. We have a lot of those types of positions, and through the pandemic, we really found that that lack of that extra little bit of capacity really took a toll on the organization. So that's a larger discussion moving forward. But we can't just keep piling work onto these departments without augmenting the staffing, and that can't be done in a vacuum with whoever screams the loudest. Sometimes it's public safety will get your attention, but another department, like say the library, maybe doesn't. It really needs to be done holistically. It needs to be looked at across the board. There need to be clear priorities and a plan. I think one of the reasons why the last staffing study that we did was so successful was because we had a plan, but then we had a plan to implement that plan. And as long as people understand that there's an implementation that will happen, they're willing to wait. But it shouldn't just be, what will happen is it will just be a free-for-all where everybody will be asking for staff, and it's going to put the advisory boards and committees in a difficult position. One thing I'd like to think I've always done in the years that I've been here is I never bring a messy issue to you that hasn't been researched and framed up. So not battling over whether or not we need 10 more police officers. Let's find out, let's get the data, let's do this professionally, and then we all agree on the information, and when you agree on the information, now you can come up with a plan. Well, if you're fighting over agreement on the information about whether or not it's 10 staff or 2, you're not going to get there. So that's kind of the position I see this organization, and we're at that crossroads where, and with my departure, I think it's a good time to look at this because we're finding that we're having trouble kind of keeping up in some departments, but it needs to be looked at across the organization. A key aspect of that as well is to look at, we keep adding boards and committees. We've added a diversity and inclusion committee, we've added a master plan implementation committee, we're now adding a traffic safety committee, with people talking about adding sustainability committee, we're adding, so we've added all these committees, so we need to take a hard look at the committees that we have now and start to eliminate some of those to free up staff. There are some committees that kind of, I'll pick on one, the cable access committee. It hasn't been a functional committee in years because there's not enough work for people to do to stay engaged. Well, that's maybe one that we should look at, and there's a few others. But as part of this, it's the staffing, but it's also the committee composition as well, and how that all plays into staff liaisons and what they're responsible for. So I'm just planting that seed. now. So when you hear about, a staffing study, that I hope you get behind it, because that's going to allow people like you in your positions as advisory committee to make an informed decision. And you're not going to get there by getting the data by yourselves internally. You need an objective party to come in to do this and frame it up in a way where you can make intelligent decisions about the direction of the town. So
Yeah.
just
Unbiased,
back.
unbiased information.
John makes a really good point about duties as well. So I'm the fire chief. I'm also in charge of the local emergency planning committee. I'm also the emergency management director. So when a crisis happens, what hat do I put on? And if I put on my emergency management, who puts on the fire chief's hat? Right? So it's really, and right now it's me. And luckily I have John, who is terrific, but John's leaving.
Right,
So,
and just to throw one more wrench into it, and what if they all needed to get on Zoom?
yeah, what?
Well, I was just gonna,
Well, who ran Zoom?
well, that's what I was just going to say. Like, when you talk about, limited depth to the bench. When we all went to remote meetings, right? This guy here is the one that led the charge to deal with setting up Zoom meetings and training staff and so forth. And again, during the pandemic, remember we lost our health director, right? He too stressed out, too much stress for him, so he quit. There is no assistant health director, so you know who stepped in and took that? Me. Threw some on him, threw some on the assistant. So every time we lost our town planner, she retired. Master Plan Implementation Committee, I started doing that. Brought the DPW director, who by the way doesn't have a deputy. We're all kind of filling in, and when things are under the best of circumstances, you can get by. But when you're taxed, when the organization gets taxed with an emergency in particular, it starts to break down. One thing, and I'll end on this, is one thing that I did want to mention is after the pandemic was over, one thing that the fire chief does with every major incident, and I think this is a terrific process, is we do a hot wash, basically. We do a debriefing. We go through what did we do well, what could we have done better, how do we improve our plans and our attack next time. And we did that after the pandemic and with all the department heads. And one thing we all said is, boy, did we all get pushed to the limit. But the first comment that was made was, we got through, we got by because we had such great camaraderie and communication with the department heads. There was no sandbox issues, as the chief likes to say. Everybody got along, supported each other, filled in when we needed to, and that's how we got by. The culture is how we got by. But you can only do that for so long and take advantage of people before they say, I need help. I'll stop there.
Questions?
It reminds me a lot of a startup environment.
Yes.
So, a lot of startups that I've worked with,
It's a very good point. Yeah.
you staff as minimally as possible, and you just work everybody, and you take on as many different roles as possible until you can start to afford to hire people that
And you
are
give them-
expertise in their
You give
areas.
them all kinds of incentives. My brother's done several startups.
Yeah.
So we're going to give you this much, this many stockings, or this much. So it works out if everything works out well, but
Yes.
you kill yourself to get there.
Yeah. Any questions?
Come on, I'm not that good. I appreciate your time. I will take a moment, as I do every time I appear in front of either this board or planning, and say, if you ever have questions, if you ever want to come down to the fire station, if you ever want to take a look around and see what we got and see our operations and talk to me, pick up the phone. That's why I'm here. Okay, give me a call. I'd love to sit down with you and say, hey, this is how we do things. And you may say, well, did you ever think about this? And Tim and I have joked around. I'm a data geek. And Tim, I got this new reporting system. He'd love it. It's awesome.
I'll have to come down.
Oh, it's awesome.
I'll be the only one to come down and sit in front of the
It
computer.
gives you these dashboards, and it's all kinds of stuff. But what's important is you have that data, so I can say, this is why. Not because there's a dead baby I'm going to throw on the table, or not because, oh my God, things are going to be. This is why.
Yeah.
So if you have questions, please feel free. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief. Next on our agenda is the revised ARHS fiscal year 2024 assessment and athletic complex cost estimate.
So in your packet is a memo from the superintendent. So as you know, when he met with you, originally, he did not have the current year's state aid had not been released yet with the change in administration. The new governor had until March 1st to provide her budget. So oddly enough, so the superintendent was using fiscal 2023 state aid numbers, which obviously you think will go up. Well, the state aid numbers did go up. However, they also changed our minimum local contribution, Bob D'Amico's favorite topic. This is the minimum that we have to pay as a community. And so this is somewhat counterintuitive, but we have more state aid, but our Northborough's assessment actually wound up going up from using last year's state aid. So there's several different calculations in here, but the bottom line is when the superintendent met with you, he was projecting a 4.12% increase in the assessment, and based on these numbers, that assessment's going to go up 4.34%. So it's not earth-shattering, but it's not what was presented. So I asked him to close the communication loop. I don't think it's going to change your perspective on anything. It kind of is what it is. The basic budget itself, the overall budget, has not changed. It's just the way the expenses have been carved up due to the state funding formulas.
And none of these things are in our control.
No, none of these are under control. There is one other thing in here which makes no sense to me because those of you that tuned in when we met with our legislative delegation knows that they're all committed to increasing regional transportation. When communities originally regionalized, the carrot that the state held out was if two small towns regionalized, like Northborough, Southborough, the state said it will pick up the transportation costs. So there was an incentive there to get some economies of scale. Well, they've never really funded it 100% ever. That's classic for the state, you know. It's like all the other incentives they give you, they then walk away from them usually at some point, or they just never fully fund it. So it's hovered around 85%. I believe under the governor's budget, it was going to 90. But we have a commitment from the legislative delegation that they're looking to increase the funding. Whether or not it'll get to 100%, I don't know. But you see it in the superintendent's memo, the biggest chunk of the impact is that regional transportation aid decreased by $116,000. That doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not sure if that will survive the legislature. So typically the way it works is, the governor's budget is usually due the third week in January. It's based on, the revenue consensus hearing that they hold. As it goes through, it's the House and then the Senate, and as that budget process unfolds, typically we don't know what our final state aid numbers are until well after town meeting sometime, late April or June. So, but historically, unless there's something really bad happening, a recession or a pandemic, historically, the numbers creep up a little bit. Not huge, like, it might be the difference between getting like 1.5% state aid to 2% state aid, right? So I'm cautiously optimistic that, the regional transportation number and the state aid numbers, the minimum aid per pupil, which is $30, the MMA in the town is advocating for $100, that would all have a raising impact on the state aid, which would have a depreciating impact on our assessment. So as it indicated in the memo, if they receive more state aid, if regional transportation doesn't get cut but actually gets increased, what we'll be looking at is later in the fiscal year, they'll revote the assessments and reduce them, which has happened in the past. So that's just an update from the superintendent.
Yeah.
So on these figures that are presented in the memo here, there's a distinction between two types of changes. One of them is in one group you have Chapter 70 funding increasing and then regional transportation aid decreasing.
Right.
So that's a net loss of $80,000 from in state aid. Now the other figures just simply relate to how the total of assessment is divvied up between Northborough.
Based on well factors largely.
And so it's a source of never-ending surprise to me that the shift is shifting more of the total assessment onto Northborough, away from Southborough.
You have to remember too, then you also have to layer in the other variable, which is enrollment. So even
Oh,
if you,
no.
even a few kids can shift your share of that budget significantly.
Oh, yes, but that was set at the time that we met with the superintendent.
Yes.
Okay, got the numbers, fine. Now, and that determines how everything above minimum local contributions
Correct.
is divvied up. But the minimum local contributions themselves shifted in such a way
Yes.
as to shift costs from Southborough to Northborough.
And it's based again on a number of wealth factors. For a while, when you go back, we were getting pretty hammered with our minimum local aid contribution. And one of the things that gets taken into consideration is your tax base. And so when Northborough got all this great economic development, when the mall went in, we got hit because it ripples through this and it shifted more of the burden onto Northborough, despite the fact that on a per capita or household income, or in terms of the value of a single-family home, in those variables, Southborough's wealth is higher. But then in terms of the tax base, and when we get, again, significant economic development, that swings things over. So it's a frustrating, complicated, dysfunctional formula. And the problem is everybody who looks at it knows it doesn't work, but there's no political will to fix it, because in order to fix it, there'd be real winners and losers. I'll throw one more out here for you. So oftentimes in my tenure here, I've heard people say, town of Shrewsbury has so much lower taxes. I'm like, yes, they do. Do you want to know why? Because when ed reform came in, the formula locked certain things into place. Now Shrewsbury is pretty comparable to the town of Northborough, right? They get 20% of their budget in state aid. We get 8%. If I got their state aid, you would have their tax bill. There's no magic there. They're but also the other thing you've seen over there is, their tax bills have just escalated. They've had overrides and everything. Their tax bills are going up. But fundamentally, they get so much more in state aid because of this formula that was locked into place based on the variables that were, at the time. And so now you have other communities now who have come up, they've grown, their wealth factors have changed, but they're still being, that part of the formula is still holding. So it's, like I said, it's not fair. But to your point, Tony, when you look at this, we're getting another 37,000, but then they cut 116,000 out of our transportation. When our legislative delegation came in to meet with us, they were touting how great it is that the state is putting another $458 million in Chapter 70 education aid. How much are you seeing?
37,000.
We're not seeing anything, or very little at the moment. So when people say, well, why are my taxes going up? That is a major factor. If as a partner, state aid is shrinking as a percentage of your revenues, well, where's that being made up? It's going to be made up in taxes. And the Student Opportunity Act, and I don't want to get too far aside, I know you've heard this before, but they passed the Student Opportunity Act. The Student Opportunity Act is designed to divert most new state revenues towards districts in need. So over 70% of all new Chapter 78, that $458 million roughly, it might be $568 million. 70% of that's going to 30 districts. All the other districts, like Northborough, are sharing about $41 million of new aid, not including what happens when your minimum local contribution changes. So it's hard to follow. It's complicated. But at least I just want you to have the information so you know what's happening. This is where we stand at the moment. I'm cautiously optimistic that the state revenues are very strong right now, and there's a lot of pressure on them to increase some revenue sharing under the unrestricted general government aid account. So under the unrestricted aid account, their revenue forecast, or their consensus hearing revenue forecast, is that it's going to go up 1.6%. But yet their revenues are going to go up significantly more than that. And so the MMA is making the argument that we need to go up at a similar proportion. So there's probably a much longer explanation. But I always like to, when things change, I want to close the loop. I don't think it's a material difference, but from what you were presented. The other thing too is, in terms of the official record, if someone goes back and looks at that meeting and pulls the packet, which is on the website, and look at it, things don't match up. I want continuity in the record for why these things have changed. Okay. So the second component of that, if I may, through the chair, is the athletic complex cost estimate. So when the superintendent came and met with you, he was using an early 90% design cost estimate. So as a project moves through its process, you've got conceptual design, development, construction, bid documents, and at each stage, at certain key points, they'll get a cost estimate. So the presentation that you were provided showed the project at the time at, this is the athletic complex at $7,540,000 roughly. So now they've got it put it out to bid, so they have bid numbers now, and so the project cost is now $7,960,000. So Northborough's share of that project, based on the regional agreement, the formula that's contained in that document, our share of that project cost is up by about $262,000. So this is more, again, these are bid level cost estimates, so they've gone out. Keep in mind now, this is the construction. This is actually the construction and soft cost for the project. What's not included, just like it would be with any capital project, this doesn't include the financing costs. So this project will be issued, financed with debt. That debt will be apportioned through the regional agreement to Northborough and Southborough. What I gave you in your packet is an updated presentation dated February 15th. The project itself is the same, but there's about halfway through, you can see the estimated project costs, and then there's a project financing schedule that's included in here based on that. And on a page after that is the town of Northborough's estimated share of the overall project cost with financing over, I believe it's 10 or 15 years. So the average single-family home in the beginning will be about $97. It peaks at $139 in fiscal 2026, and then thereafter it's about $72 for the balance on an annual basis. So, but those are the costs. And again, I think they're using, I want to say it's probably a 4.5% interest rate assumption, but it'll be whatever it is when we actually go out to the market. When the regional high school goes out to the market. Keep in mind too, with regard to that project, we aren't issuing the debt. So the town of Southborough has to approve the project, and Northborough has to approve the project, and then the regional high school will issue the debt, and the debt service then will be apportioned through the formula and the regional agreement. So, just again, want to give you an update on that project because again, you had one number at an earlier estimate, and this is the current one.
Any questions?
Okay.
Next on the agenda is the fiscal year 2023 reserve fund transfers, Aspet Valley assessment, snow and ice overdraft, treasurer's office tax bill printing.
So Jason Little, Finance Director, is here tonight. Do you want to come up in case there's any questions? But I'm going to go through the memo. You met with Assabet Valley Tech, and they talked and explained one of the complicating factors for their budget this year was that the FY23 assessment was was shorted by our minimum local contribution. There's those three words again. Originally, the Governor Baker had made a recommendation to the state legislature to allow municipalities to use some of their ESSER 2 funds. Now, ESSER 2 funds are the school equivalent of ARPA funds. It's basically pandemic grants. And so the governor made the recommendation that to allow districts to use some of their pandemic funding to offset the town's minimum local contribution. Unfortunately, the Mass legislature never enacted that, so Assabet had proceeded, assuming that that was going to happen, and it didn't happen. And so the long and short of it is that based on the minimum local contribution, our assessment for fiscal '23 is about a little over $31,365 short. So we don't really have any discretion in that. That is, we need to pay that. So on the one hand, I appreciate the fact that Assabet was, using their grant funds to reduce our assessment. They thought that was a good idea. Unfortunately, what we probably should have done in retrospect, I think everybody assumed that that was going to pass the legislature. We probably should have paid the full assessment and then had them reduce our assessment. But that's not how they did it, for whatever reason, and so here we are. So one of the things that's needed tonight is to transfer from the reserve account that $31,365 for the Assabet Valley assessment. And by the way, it's not just us, all member towns are in the exact same position and need to do the same thing. Jason, you want to speak to the treasurers and the snow and ice?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me here. From the memo, I think the memo lays out the amount pretty clearly. $4,600 is a pretty low amount to be coming forward and asking for a transfer for, but it kind of reveals that we don't ask for anything in our budgets that we don't need. So there's really no capacity to fund the increase for the tax bill printer. Unfortunately, after we set the budget, we had worked with Globe Direct was the bill printer. They decided they were getting out of the market, and we didn't find out about this till after town meeting. We need to print tax bills. We need to send them to residents. So we need to do this. We'll have a deficit if we don't cover this. So basically, we went out to bid. We got competitive quotes, and so we're working with the same vendor that does the motor vehicle bills. So our property tax bills and the motor vehicle bills. So we'll realize some economies of scale, I think, working with a quality vendor. That's $4,600.
Hey, Jason, just out of curiosity, is there any way to go electronic with that, or is there legal reasons why you have to send out?
Well, we do have to operate under Mass General Law, so we are required to notify everybody of their tax bill amounts and so forth. There are some provisions where we can allow people to opt into electronic tax bills, where we'd have to keep a record of somebody. I believe they have to make the request in writing that they get their bill in electronically, and we really don't have the capacity to enact like a major undertaking of maintaining a database of who's requested getting a bill electronically
Right.
versus one that's printed. But it's maybe on the horizon in the future, because it is kind of an antiquated process of producing a tax bill and mailing it. But due to legal reasons, a lot of times documents have to be produced paper form, and people have to have the opportunity to view those documents. So
Right.
that's
Yeah,
really
well,
what's
just
behind that.
a quite, I get
No,
that
it's
it's
a good question.
all or nothing type of thing. Either everybody does it or you can't do it. It's,
Right. And again, as technology advances down the road, maybe more people will be signing up for that, but we haven't encountered that yet.
okay, thank you.
And, all right, so usually at the end of the year, we come forward with a snow and ice deficit to cover it within the same fiscal year. Snow and ice is a little different from every other appropriation in the town budget, whereas we can overexpend that legally. At this point in the year, it's, we know what we're over the $437,000 that we've appropriated this year. So we're coming forward asking for a transfer because we know that amount. So have my fingers crossed, we won't be back asking for another transfer later, but
You know we're getting a
it's
snowstorm now,
Yeah.
for sure.
It was funny when we got the last snowstorm, I was sitting at home going, transfer. Watching the trucks go by, I knew it was coming.
You know, the thing is, and again, I had sent you out by email a copy of the DPW director's memo, and, you know, he goes through, he lists out every single snow event that we have, how much snow we got, the duration, and roughly, you know, what it cost us. Well, you know, it wasn't a lot of snow, but when it doesn't snow and it rains, and then at night, the temperature drops down, it's icing. And the big expense was there were 11 ice-only events. And the good news is when it's only ice, it's our employees. We don't have to call in the contractors. When it snows and we can't handle it, we have to call in the contractors, and that's when the costs really go through a much higher rate. But the issue is we threw down a lot of salt, and salt is up $10 a ton. You know, and so we went through a lot of salt, a lot of icing events. So, you know, on the one hand, people are like, boy, how, you know, why is the budget, you know, overexpended? And we typically budget a 6-year rolling average. You know, there are years that we are under budget. You know, I was kind of hoping this was going to be one of them. In fact, the first initial blush at looking at this was, oh, we're right at just at 100%, and if we don't get anything else, we'll be over. And then Jason let me know that there were a couple of bills for salt delivery that was in the mix there. And so, in fact, you know, we're just by snow and ice budget overdrafts. This is very, very minor. But our practice in town has always been to, if there's an overage, that we deal with it within the current fiscal year. Even though you legally could kick it to the next year, we find that skews the numbers. When we start looking at the history, we like to deal with the expenses within the fiscal year. So, and one other comment, just in terms of like the bill, you know, at the end of the year, we're clearly going to finish in the black. But if, you know, we appropriate at town meeting those individual line items, you can't exceed those. So, Treasurer's office literally doesn't have $4,700 or $4,600. So that's why they're here. And Jason won't let them, even though it's part of his department, won't let them pay a bill if there isn't a source for the money. So if you're overdrafted, then you need to come in here for the reserve account transfer. So that's why it seems like a small thing, and it's kind of like and I don't remember really us ever really getting into that situation. Usually it's the year end and it's snow and ice that typically does it, or a major building, you know, issue, a boiler goes or something like that. So.
Well, I actually appreciate seeing small amounts like that because it shows a level of detail and transparency into everything that's going on. So I think that's what small amount of monies are just as important as big amounts. So thank you.
By way of reference, you've got, there's $175,000 in the account. And by the way, this is why we have the reserve account, because otherwise you'd have to have a special town meeting to pay a $4,600 bill. So there's $175,000 in the account. The total transfers being requested tonight are $81,965, and that would leave $93,035 remaining in the reserve account at this stage of the game.
Yeah.
Should I read the motion?
Yes.
What is?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the 3 Appropriations Committee Reserve Fund transfer requests totaling $81,965 as presented in the Finance Director's March 20th, 2023 memo pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 6.
Second?
Moved in second. Any discussion?
Just one question. We've got a lot of items that are increasing our taxes this year, especially with the selectmen not spending the ARPA funds to help us. Since we do have the small amount of money left and the deputy fire chief is not in the budget, could we take whatever money is left here and devote it to that deputy fire chief for this coming year?
No, not directly. There's two separate fiscal years, so in theory, you could close, when that money closes out at the end of the year, because whatever is in the reserve account that isn't used closes out to free cash. And in theory, it's not, you could use free cash then to fund a position, but as you know, under our policy, we limit the amount of free cash in the operating budget to roughly 1%. So no, it's really the two separate fiscal year appropriations. So it's always funny because we were talking about this earlier today. When it comes to budgeting, it's like on the one hand, you're scraping to hit targets, and then there's other earmarks or funding, like there's $2.6 million in ARPA funds that are available to be used. But I don't have access to that, and so we're scraping, so you're working within each bucket that you have to stay within, and each fiscal year that you have to stay within. So no, it's a nice idea, but no, we can't do that.
Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Transfers pass.
Thank you.
Very good. I just want to give you two. So on the town meeting warrant, this is not on your agenda tonight, so I'm just distributing this for your information. This is a memo from the finance director that went to the Board of Selection at their last meeting, and it pertains to a warrant article that provides senior tax relief. So the board voted that to increase the thresholds, the income thresholds to 64,000, which is the maximum limit, and to reduce the interest rate on essentially what is like a reverse mortgage from 8%, which is the statutory number, to 4%. So not asking you to debate this tonight, just want to distribute it, but it's one of the financial articles that I think the committee will need to provide a recommendation on. So I want you to have that information.
Will this be on our agenda next meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But I just wanted you to distribute that tonight since you're here. So,
Next on our agenda is discussion regarding committee recommendations.
So the charge of the committee by charter is to weigh in on every financial article. Again, not getting into discussion and deliberation tonight. What I typically do is I take the full warrant and I provide you with just a summary of all of the articles of financial nature. So for instance, we just talked about the senior tax relief memo. That's Article 14. So as you go through, it's broken up into operating budgets, capital, CPC articles, and then the athletic complex, which we just discussed a few moments ago. So as you go through and look at these, let me know if there's anything, or let the chairman know before we get into voting your recommendations at a subsequent meeting. If there's any articles on here that you feel like you need additional information on or we haven't touched upon. Probably the only other one that you haven't had an actual full presentation on is probably Article 13. This is the opioid settlement funds. All that article does is it takes, we are part of the opioid settlement monies, and so all it's doing is we have to segregate those funding because it can only be used for certain things. And so again, the legislature failed to help us out. They were supposed to pass a legislation that would allow us to create a special revenue account to put those funds into, so that then we can designate them or segregate them and come up with how we're going to use them and then be able to report. So because the legislature failed to do that, and I don't know why, I think they just ran out of time and it wasn't a priority, these monies now just came in as a general revenue and close out the free cash. So what we did is we asked the Department of Revenue to take those monies, pull them out of free cash, designate it for us, and their recommendation is that we appropriate it into a standalone article. We don't need to decide how it's going to get spent right now. Really, the purpose of this article is just to segregate the funds so they don't get commingled, and we can keep the reporting in line with the settlement. But other than that, you have literally had a presentation on every one of these other articles. But again, as you go through, you look at this prior to your next meeting, if there's anything that you would need in terms of additional information or have any questions, you let the chairman know. We'll put it on your agenda. We can have that information for you at your next meeting before you start to go through and make your recommendations for the town meeting. If anybody sees anything on here that jumps out at you that you don't recall having a presentation on or having copious amounts of paper on, speak up now, and we're happy to get it for you. As I scan through it, the opioid settlement and the senior tax relief were the only two that jumped out at me, and they're relatively minor issues. And again, the Board of Selectmen just made that decision about a week or so ago, so that's why we haven't brought it before you. We had a placeholder in the warrant, but until they voted that they were going to do it and what level, wasn't anything for us to report. Okay?
If we as a committee wanted to include a letter of some sorts with our packet for town meeting, should we have that ready, have it written so that we can review it?
Oh, yes, here's some great news for you, Tim. Congratulations on your chairmanship. What we do, staff does, if you go in and I can distribute, what I'll do is I'll send you by email a copy of last year's report, the committee's report. What we do is,
You gave us one.
did I know that's probably financial planning that you're thinking of. They just completed their report, so I distributed that.
No, but I think you gave us a copy of last year's report that we could use as a.
Okay, I might have. I'm very efficient in that way. But regardless, I'll send you another copy, because it's by email. It doesn't cost me anything to do that. But what we'll do is the staff will do the back end, which is really just the article number, the spending amounts, descriptions that are in the warrant. It's really just the information piece of it. And then you will vote your recommendations, but on the transmittal letter portion, that's typically drafted by the chair and then shared with the committee and approved. So that would be something between now and your hopefully your next meeting, you would work.
Draft that.
Yep. But we'll give you we'll give you the framework and the just strictly factual information to make sure that part is accurate. Okay.
Any questions? Our next meetings, March 27th, 2023, joint budget hearing with the Board of Selectmen. I would assume that's at 7. Is that in person?
No, but that is by Zoom. So we will send the committee, Diane Wackler, my office will send you the link. It is a joint meeting, so you'll all be promoted up as panelists to participate in that meeting.
I promise I'll promote you.
Our Zoom guru will promote you. And then as of right now, we have March 29th is the committee to sit down to begin to go through your recommendations in a draft of your report. Whether or not you complete that work on the 29th or not, depends on your
Is there going to be anybody else on our agenda that night, or is it just?
Nope, just you guys.
Okay.
The only purpose is to go through, and that's why I'm asking tonight, based on the list that I provided, if there's anybody else that you want to meet with, any other departments or any other information, if you let the chairman know, and we'll make sure we get you the information, and we'll arrange to have them at your meeting. If you feel like, again, I gave you updated information tonight on the assessment and the Algonquin Athletic Complex. If you felt like you had more questions, we'd make sure the superintendent was here. Whatever the board is, whatever the committee needs, we'll make them available.
Great, thank you. Any other business?
Would you entertain a motion to adjourn?
I most certainly would
Mr.
entertain.
Chairman, if I may, just before you do, you've got audience members, so if anybody, you get through the chair if you wanted to, take any comment.
comments today, but it was interesting to hear some of the stuff that I'm gonna have to know about, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Want to make sure we're open to the public for their input.
I have a comment. I think it's helpful when, if you are going to take public comment, that it's on the agenda, because, you know, I think you would have more people coming here if they thought that they could participate and ask questions.
Yeah, we use the same method as a planning board and not having that as a specific agenda item.
I'm sorry?
The planning board doesn't have public comment on their agendas either?
Well, I don't know about the planning board. I know about the Board of Selectmen, and it's very clear that we take public comment.
Thank you.
I'll second Janice's motion.
All those in favor? All those opposed? We are adjourned.
For the record, 8:28.